Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good night, depending on what part of the country you're located at. This is Jasir Jamal from Texas 1031 Exchanges, located down south of the country, of course. So before I start this video, please understand that every single video I have published by far and that I intend on publishing, including this one, every single thing that's being said in these videos is for educational and informational purposes only. Please do not consider or construe anything I say in these videos as legal or investment advice in any way, shape, or form. Please always do your own due diligence and always consult with your CPA, your tax attorney, and your estate attorney before making any major investment decisions, whether it be with regards to 1031 exchanges or investments in general. So with that being said, let's get into the video. So today I want to talk about a few key things that you as the taxpayer always need to look out for when you are doing either a closing or, in this case, more specifically, a closing with 1031 exchanges. Well, usually, of course, everybody can have your best interest at heart, of course, but at the same time, you should also be sure to keep an eye on certain things. And today, I'm going to tell you what exactly you need to keep an eye on, specifically with all the documents you sign for 1031 exchange closings. So let's go ahead and get started. The first one will be about the HUD statement, the settlement statement, the closing statement, whatever you want to call it. It's not really a big deal. So here we go. So you got the HUD statement right over here. Of course, you got the buyer right up here. And in this case, we're going to specifically talk about the relinquished property, and then we'll get to the replacement property in a second. So you are the seller right over here, and you're about to sell your property and do a 1031 exchange, right? And of course, these lines are the line item expenses that you and the buyer will have. But you as the seller, you need to make sure, your qualified intermediary or whichever 1031 exchange company you go with, they're always going to make sure that this is always on the HUD statement, but you should also be sure to look at it before you sign the HUD statement. So just make sure that over here at the bottom, you as the seller, there should be a portion that says, oh, not close, I meant cash due to / from seller. Or it could say something else. This is the nature of what it normally says there. Just make sure if you're doing your 1031 exchange and you're about to sell your relinquished property, make sure that this is always $0 down there. And why am I saying that? Because when you're doing your 1031 exchange, you're selling your relinquished property, that cash is not going inside of your pocket. It's going straight into your 1031 exchange company's escrow account that they opened for you under your name, but it's not going in your hands, and we need to make sure that it's always reflected on the HUD statement and on all the paperwork so that the IRS can see, based on all the paperwork, that the money never went to your personal bank account or anything of that nature. It went to a qualified intermediary's escrow account that was opened on your behalf and under your name. So that's the main thing. So always make sure your qualified intermediary is always going to make sure it's there. And if you decide to go with us, we're always going to make sure it's there. But at the same time, it's just best to do your own due diligence as well, as I mentioned, and make sure that you look at your HUD statement and all documents before you sign them, So just make sure it's a $0 over there, and that's one little portion there. But then at the same time, now this one over here, this condition over here applies to both the HUD statement for the relinquished property and the replacement property, both. Always make sure that this is always correct, what I'm about to tell you right now. So you have the settlement date on the top of the statement. No worries. And you will have a disbursement date at the top of the statement, probably right underneath the settlement date. No issues. What do you have to do over here? Well, just make sure that your settlement date and the disbursement dates, in this case, let's stick with a date of June 2nd. Let's stick with that. So just make sure that, look, if you're going to be signing off on all these documents and your closing is going to be happening on June 2nd, and if your funding, most importantly, is going to happen on June 2nd, make sure that the HUD statement or the closing statement always has the same dates. Make sure if the funding and the closing of you signing documents and the funding and the wiring is going to be happening on June 2nd, make sure that the settlement date and the disbursement date is June 2nd. If you're going to be funding on June 3rd or on June 1st, whatever the case may be, make sure that that disbursement date and the settlement date is for that specific day for when the funding and all the closing happens. And why am I saying this? Because look, at the end of the day, I mean, you want to make sure that all these little things like the dates, the zeros, and all that little stuff is correct. Because God forbid, further down the line, if you ever get audited by the IRS and they're looking into you for some other matter, and somehow they came across this matter right over here as well, and if they saw that these dates are changed, if they saw that we as the qualified we as the 1031 exchange company, or you ended up wiring your funds over for the closing on June 3rd or on June 1st, but over here the settlement statement says June 2nd, that can be seen as a discrepancy, and that can give the IRS a probable cause to dig more into your case, you know? So that's where it could be an issue, which is why it's always best to make sure these little things are correct, because these little things can and may or will be costly down the line. So it's best that we should make sure they're always correct, you know? So as I mentioned, these two things over here, they apply to the HUD statement for your relinquished and replacement property. So just make sure that the dates are correct before you sign them, of course. Just make sure for your relinquished property, the HUD statement, it shows a 0 at the bottom. And that's pretty much it for this portion. Let me go ahead and I guess we're just going to use this eraser right here. Let's make it work. Sorry, this is taking a little while. I forgot my eraser. It is not in my possession as of right this minute. So, all right, that's good enough right there. So, the other tip I have for you is, I'm pretty sure in one of my other videos you may have seen me, specifically the video about the step-by-step process for a forward exchange. I did mention some documents that a qualified intermediary is always going to make you sign, like the assignment of the contract, the notice of replacement and notice of relinquished property, and the exchange agreement, of course. You want to make sure you always sign those things, of course, but here are a few little things out of those documents that you always need to make sure of, that you should always do them right so that they're not costly down the line, you know? So when the qualified intermediary or your 1031 exchange company, when they send you the assignment of contract, you want to make sure that you always sign that. I know it's a little document and I know sometimes it can slip out, but please make sure that it's always signed. And why am I saying that? Because look, especially for your replacement property case, when the qualified intermediary or the 1031 exchange company is holding your money in escrow for you, and when you go out there and you find your replacement property, you're of course, as the buyer, going to put down some earnest money to the what you call it, the seller for the replacement property. And if that earnest money is going to come out of our escrow account, or even if it doesn't, you always want to make sure that the contract is assigned over to the 1031 exchange company at all times. Because at the end of the day, we need to show that the money flowed from there and the money always came from their end. We want to make sure that we do not show that the money is coming from your end, otherwise the IRS may get a bit of a perception about the fact that you are the one who had access to the money. We, of course, will make sure that electronically through bank statements and stuff like that, you never had access to the money, but at the same time, it's always best to show on paper as well that it never happened. That's what the IRS wants to see. So therefore, always make sure you sign that assignment of contract, specifically the one for your replacement property. You always want to make sure of that, all right? And then aside from that, these are just a few things that I believe you as the taxpayer should be aware of. I mean, your 1031 exchange company or your qualified intermediary, they will always make sure that it's always correct, but sometimes mistakes do happen. So therefore, you as the taxpayer should always be a second set of eyes to make sure things like that are always covered. I know they're little things, but as I mentioned before, those little things can be costly down the line. So it's best to do them right and perfect the first time versus having problems down the line, you know? So aside from that, that's it for me today, folks. I hope y'all got some nice knowledge out of this video, and you guys will go ahead and know what to look out for when you're doing a 1031 exchange and when you're signing all your documents and all that good stuff. But aside from that, if you guys have any more questions, feel free to reach out to me. And until then, I will see y'all in the next video.